The speaker to begin this afternoon's session has degrees in civil engineering with a focus in structural, in engineering mechanics, which is also known as applied physics, and a PhD in materials engineering science, which as far as I have been able to discern are the disciplines that are most directly relevant to evaluating what actually happened to the Twin Towers and at the World Trade Center in general. She's a former professor of mechanical engineering at Clemson University who appears to have been denied tenure because of her involvement in 9/11 research. In my opinion, she is the single most qualified scientist to be studying these issues. Please join me in welcoming Judy Wood.
Well, hello, and thank you for coming, and thanks for being here. 9/11 has been referred to as the new Pearl Harbor, but I beg to differ on that. I don't think it's the new Pearl Harbor. It's the new Hiroshima. It's the new Hiroshima. Now, which terrorist group did that? We talked about this. Kind of wiped out everything. But what about the day before Hiroshima? Would anyone have thought that could have happened? Someone posted this message on a forum on the web, and I think it's just beautifully stated. We stand at the beginning of a new age. Our government has in its hands a method of disrupting the molecular basis of matter, and its first impulse was to weaponize it. Is this so hard to understand? Like splitting atoms to create destruction was so hard to understand in 1945. Of course, this new invention came when the United States ruled supreme. A weapon system of vast new power comes online, and we don't have an enemy worthy of it. So naturally, we use it on ourselves. Wag the dog. Molecular dissociation. What I would like to do today is show you the evidence, the data, and let you make up your own mind. Let you think for yourself. And there's nothing more important in this day and age than each of us thinking for ourselves and making up our own mind, but looking at the data ourselves. So let's start at the beginning. Once upon a time, there were two towers. And we notice with these two towers, you have, see if the mouse moves on the screen. Yeah. There's this Tower 3 down here, which is 22 stories tall. This itty-bitty thing down here is Building 6, which is 8 stories tall. Then Buildings 4 and 5 are 9 stories each. But these are huge buildings. The 47-story Building 7. Huge buildings. Big, beefy core structures. Columns on the outside with the floors strapped between them. Very robust. So, if you have, if this is thought of as a tree, and you cut a hole in the side of the tree so the Keebler elves can put their cookie oven in there and cook or live in there, do you think that would affect the structure? We see many trees with a hole in the side. The beauty of this design is that it just almost insignificantly would affect the strength. So there we have the towers, and then they went away. What happened? That's what we're here to figure out. In this picture on the left, we're looking at Building 7, so we know what day this picture was taken. Where did the tower go? The day before, if you took this picture, you would have a tower between the camera person and Building 7. Where'd it go? They have told us that steel was shipped off to China. Well, this picture appears to have been taken before noon on 9/11. Just how fast could they ship it off to China? So let's think about what we're being told. And this is what it looked like a week or so later. This is a satellite image of ground zero. You notice building 6 here with the cutouts in it. Cylindrical cutouts. They go all the way down to the ground floor, all about the same diameter, about 24 feet in diameter. And the thing that caught my attention the most is this hole over here on Liberty Street. Tower 2 used to be located here, and there's Bankers Trust. That's Liberty Street that runs between the two. Why would there be a big hole in the middle of the street? And it looks like it could go down 60 feet, and it's empty. Where's the rest of the rubble? And just how fast did it disappear? I will not say collapse, because there's evidence that not much of it hit the ground. If you dropped a billiard ball off the roof of one of the towers, it would take 9.22 seconds to hit the ground. The seismograph showed the ground rumbled for 8 seconds. Houston, we have a problem. But what about all of the energy requirements? Now, there's a lot of opposition to what I present, which is mainly data. But folks who oppose seeing the data or having anyone else see the data say, well, it's impossible to have enough energy to do what you're saying got done. Well, then we should still see some buildings standing there. But the energy is an issue. There's different forms of energy. And if we look at this fourth one, that doesn't work so well. This fourth picture, that is one of the towers. This is a nuclear test. These other two are Mount St. Helens. What do we have in common with all of those pictures? Dust. Lots of dust and lots of power. A huge release of energy. So here we have the towers, and we're looking from the right-hand side. So I can move this tiny bit here. We're looking from over here at the towers. Here's the Bankers Trust building. We're just about eye level with Bankers Trust. And we're going to look straight across at that elevation, which is about the rooftop level of Bankers Trust, how far that is from the ground. And here's that image from that eye level. What is all of this? That's about 2/3 of Tower 2. Do you believe me? We're missing 2/3 of Tower 2. It hasn't hit the ground yet. Bankers Trust is a 40-story building. This tower was 110 stories. Where did it go? I call this the snowball picture. That snowball cannot account for 2/3 of the building. And again, there's that elevation. So what about the seismograph? Well, there was a 2.4 magnitude earthquake earlier that same year in January, and this is what the chart looked like. But when the second tower, quote, collapsed, according to the USGS, this is the chart. A whole lot smaller. I don't know if there was filtering or what, but it's kind of unbelievable that you drop two 110-story buildings, 500,000 tons each, and it doesn't even make the same seismographic signal as a 2.4 earthquake earlier that year. We also have Building 7, which they said was a 0.6 on the Richter scale. You know what 6.6 on the Richter scale is equivalent to? A jackhammer. So you have a 47-story building disappears without, tickling the ground more than a jackhammer would. A little bit strange. And here's where our 2.3 magnitude is. The towers were 2.3 and 2.1 for the north and south towers. And that's just barely over the equivalent of a quarry blast. Does that make sense? And here's the bathtub, the wonderful bathtub that protected lower Manhattan from being flooded. Now, how the foundation was made for the towers, they poured concrete on the bedrock. So wouldn't that concrete be busted up if the rest of the concrete in the building busted up? Some questions to ask. The sound, I don't think is going to...
Yes.
Forgot about that. There's a sound feed?
I mean, obviously, we've looked at all of the seismic signals. The main focus of that was to establish the timing of the various events, and if any, again, using it also to see if there were any events that we could not explain other than it being the collapse of the towers and the World Trade Center 7. The signal strength due to the collapse of the towers were not of any magnitude that was seismically significant from an earthquake design standpoint, or from the design or failure of a structural component, or of, I would say, a piping system that might be used in a structure. So there wasn't anything that gave us pause in terms of that being a significant seismic event.
This is Shyam Sundar of NIST telling us at this meeting in this past December that there was no significant seismic impact on the ground when the towers went away that could cause damage to surrounding structures. That was an amazing thing for him to have said. So no wonder why the bathtub wasn't disturbed. The bathtub did get damaged later. When they brought in those mega cranes, that's when the damage began to occur. So these various earth-moving equipment cranes that they brought in caused more damage than 2 500,000-ton buildings landing on them. And I think you're familiar with the design of the Trade Center, and I think you saw this picture earlier, that the footprint of each of the towers is here, and the base is still there. It wasn't shattered. The foundation built on bedrock is still there. And the PATH train tunnels did not get damaged. Yes, there was some water in them, but with all those fire hoses, the water had to go somewhere. And once they pumped it out, it stayed dry. And one of my favorite pictures is Roadrunner. He survived. He survives anything. He survived a 500,000-ton building falling on him without a scratch. And he's now living at hangar, was it 17 at JFK? But these are from the Warner Brothers store, and they've saved these things. So how do you get a building of that size falling down and the first sub-basement isn't damaged? Dust. Lots of dust. That's how it happens. This part of the building doesn't make a thud when it hits. Fruit with dust on it. Dust everywhere. Now, if we look at the 95th story there, up here, you can see this mechanical floor down here, and at that elevation, and that is approximately where Tower 2 was, quote, hit, where it got its hole. So this top pile driver, they tried to make it seem, looks like it just disintegrated before floor 78 began to move downward. Again, here's floor 78. This piece here rotates over and then disappears. And then the rest continues down. We're going to notice things like this piece here. I call them wheat checks, those outer column segments, groups. They were turning to dust midair, but the aluminum cladding that goes over them did not, which is a little bit peculiar. And again, a very large section of wheat checks falling through the air, and I don't even believe it hit the ground. We didn't hear of anybody, getting stuff landing on top of them. There were a few odds and ends that went across the street and whatnot, but not 110 stories worth of outer columns. Again, looking at Tower 2, the snowball, why isn't there any more debris lower than this? It looks like the demolition wave was ahead of free fall of gravity. This is a 40-story building. This used to be 110. Where did it go? It looks like not much of it landed on the ground either. It looks like it went in a blender and got stirred up. But there was a lot of dust everywhere, very fine powder. In the second portion of my talk, we're going to evaluate the dust very carefully. This is a once-over of the general observations that we see at the scene. Look at this dust around their feet. Dust everywhere, very fine dust, and it's all the same size, approximately. If you threw a brick off of the roof of a building and it landed on the pavement below, you'd have big pieces, small pieces, some powder in between size pieces, a wide range. You wouldn't have all the same size powder.
And what was that size?
Very small. I have not evaluated myself, but I've seen photographs of it, and you can't discern the dust samples. I've seen reports, we'll talk about that in the second portion, because there's a lot of questions about the dust studies they've presented to us. But this, to me, doesn't look like a collapse. This looks like a drinking fountain made out of dust. And then there's the famous spire we've heard about. That corner of the core columns that disappeared before our eyes. It just turned to dust. Here's stages of it. A little video clip of it. And you see a bunch of dust sitting on the various levels there. Individual photographs in sequence here show first this freestanding bunch of core columns, and we know how tall Building 7 is, right here. 47 stories. So maybe these inner core columns that are freestanding, about 60 stories, would you say? 60 stories, and they're standing all by themselves. They're pretty strong and pretty rigid. They can't be very flexible. It can't be like spaghetti, because how would it be standing by itself? So that tells us that these columns are very stiff and strong at that moment. Notice how they move and just turn to dust. If they're that stiff and rigid, how is it going to go straight down and just, without rotating over even? It just turns to dust. And the dust rolls down the street. Lots of dust, like world's records of any demolition we've ever seen. But it's interesting, it only rolls out so far, and then it goes up, as though it has a stopwatch. It only is allowed to roll out for a distance, then it starts going upward. We're just looking at the data. We're not trying to fit it to any idea, just looking at the data. And after the towers go away, what is this dust here coming up from the streets? Dust going out across the water. Lots of dust. And notice the shadows. It blocks out the sunlight. Rolling down the streets. Now, when the King Dome was taken down by conventional controlled demolition, the highest the dust went was about the height of the King Dome. And in the Seattle Times it said, and it filled the air, downtown was filled for almost 20 minutes before it all settled out. How long did this take to settle out? This is a satellite image, and this appears to be going into the upper atmosphere. traveling down the eastern seaboard. This doesn't look like a collapse to me. This looks like jet engines shooting upward. Where did it go? And a building that's often forgotten. We have Tower 3 here, which was between 1 and 2, 22-story building. Early on, I'd see pictures on the web of Building 6, and I'd see pictures of Building 3, and I got them confused and thought they were the same building, because they both have these vertical cylindrical cutouts. Now, why would this be freestanding afterwards, just be left standing like that? And if this collapsed, where did the material go? Everything's ground level here. The fire trucks didn't get hit. All the windows blew out, but they didn't get damaged otherwise. And here's a picture a couple of days later, about the same shot. There's nothing left of that 22-story building. Ground level. A few of these wheat checks from Tower 1's western wall, and that's about it, of the entire Building 1. Look how where people are standing. That's just one thickness of the beam, just laid out perfectly on the street, as though they danced over and laid down so they'd be easy to load. This is what was there the day before. A lot of building that just disappeared. Here's where the towers were, and here's where Building 3 was. And we hear about the toasted cars. They were over here. There was paper between the two locations. Nothing burned. And of course, those cutouts out of Building 6, and we have cutouts out of Building 5, and what happened to the rest of Building 4? That's where the tower stood. And this is an interesting map done by the USGS. It shows how Building 6 had that group of 24-foot diameter holes in it, just removing about 50% of the building's mass. I wonder why they'd want to do that. And notice out here in Liberty Street, these big holes in Liberty Street. Empty at the bottom. But what is the most bizarre is you're missing two 110-story buildings, and the rubble pile for them is almost non-existent compared to Buildings 4, 5, and 6, the height of them. But this is Building 4. It used to cover a lot more area. Only the north wing of Building 4 is left standing. The rest is just missing. And again, there's Building 4. It used to cover this much territory. And I think it's supposed to, check out that hole in the street. It goes down maybe 60 feet. What's it there for? If something fell in it, we should have whatever it was that fell in it, sitting in it, on top of the hole, or filling it up. And a closer view of Building 6. What could cause this? More importantly, this is the northern direction. This is Building 1, where it stood, Tower 1. That's the northern wall. It was 110 stories tall. Building 6, this rubble pile is not 8 stories tall. It isn't even 1 story tall. But let's say it's 8 or 10 stories tall. Where are the other 100 stories? Where's the northern wall? This is Building 7 rubble pile. These holes are empty. It's missing in action. Where did it fall? And there's the postal building over here, never got a scratch on it all day. This is the street between the two. Okay, this is Vesey Street. This is West Street. And we're going to look at that intersection. Right after the event, there's paper on the ground, but nothing else. A few pieces of aluminum cladding up here. You could drive a four-wheeler over it, no problem. You probably drive a two-wheel regular sedan over it. You might worry about hurting the tires, but you could negotiate through. Something interesting, I don't know how well it shows up here. The various fire trucks all seem to have lost their windows. Okay, we're just looking at the data. We don't know what would cause that, but it's interesting. Nothing seemed to have fallen on them. There's just paper on the ground, but they're missing the windows. Here's some fellows working on something. They're getting ready to plug in their fire hose probably and put out this fire. But what caught those cars on fire? There's just paper leading up to the cars. And again, we're down here on West Street looking north toward Building 7. Looking at the shadows, it looks like it's just a little bit before noon on 9/11. There should be that tower between us. The pedestrian walkway you can see over here, it's like one story off the ground. Where did it all go? Another picture, this is from FEMA. The pictures I've collected, I've deliberately gotten them from a variety of sources as somewhat of a check. A lot of them are from FEMA, some from the Library of Congress, various other sites. Those are the two main ones. But look at the rubble pile, or whatever you want to call it. There's just not much in here. You don't park ambulances up on the 10th floor, so that tells you where ground level is. But another thing we'll notice is, okay, here's the rubble pile from Building 7. And by comparison, where's Building 1? We see a lot of these fumes coming out of the ground. And I use a totally different vocabulary. Some folks could say it looks like smoke, but if we called that smoke, we're biasing our observations. We're trying to imagine that it's something from fire. Well, let's just call it fumes. Fumes from who knows what, but fumes. So there's a lot of fumes and it's coming out of the rubble pile of Building 7 as well as Building 1. Maybe even 6. This is a picture a couple of days later of Building 7 from the other side, from the back side. You got some wall there, but not a whole lot of anything else, but at least it looks a little taller. This is a picture from the east, looking west through the complex. This is where Tower 1 stood. You're looking at ground level from east to west without any obstruction. Where's the rubble pile? That's what you used to be able to see through that same view. So all of that material went somewhere. Where did it go? Also, it should be noted that this plaza here doesn't have dirt on it. There's no dirt at the World Trade Center complex. Maybe people have a few potted plants in their office. You'll see in the second presentation an unbelievable amount of dirt. And this will look like it used to be a baseball field. That's what used to be there. That's what's there right afterwards. That is a lot of material. Now let's see if we can find Building 6. Building 6 is like right about that elevation. It towers over the rubble pile of Tower 1. We're missing material. Now this is an interesting sheet that's laying out in the middle of West Street. It looks like a 20-story section of the western wall, hopped over 100 feet, did this pirouette, rotated around, and laid down in the middle of the street. It almost made it, but nicked this corner just a little bit. It's just one wall thickness, needs to be laid down there. But there's no other chunks like that anywhere. Again, we're looking up VC Street. Here's Tower 7, still remaining. So we know what day this is. Tower 1 is gone. There's nothing at street level. Where are those outer columns? Anybody find them? Maybe they're hiding under that, somebody's hat there. It was this intersection looking down this street. Holes. Heard about the holes. Cylindrical cutouts. See, this isn't one hole. This is a whole bunch of small diameter cylindrical cutouts that coalesced. And looking at using the wheat checks as a scale, looking at the diameter, it's about 24 feet in diameter consistently.
The cutout?
Yeah. The diameter, like this hole, that hole. There's some different sizes, but this is the most common size.
So there's a hole there, but the material is gone, the outer walls will remain.
Of this building. It's like if you were standing at the street level, you wouldn't realize that over half of the... Yeah, that 50% of the building's mass is gone. It looks like it's all still there.
The mass is literally not dropped down on the bottom where it's pancaked down, but it's gone.
It's just gone. Building 6. Yeah, it's empty, which is bizarre. And this is inside that hole. And this is an 8-story building. So if you count down from the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you can see we're right at the first floor. You can account for all 8 floors.
They're sheared.
Pardon me?
They're sheared vertically.
Correct, but there's no material left. It's like something just made them disappear in that zone. Let's look at Building 5 over in the far corner. It has, my goodness, 24-foot diameter holes. Here's a slightly larger hole, and folks would wonder what that corner is sticking out. Turns out it's a flipped piece. If you flipped it back, you'd find the cylindrical cutout below it. And there's some other odds and ends around, like this hole here, which has a smaller hole within it. My favorite, Building 4. Building 4's perimeter used to be here. This is where Tower 2 stood. And Building 4, the main body of it, butted up against Tower 2. But we only have that northern wing left. It was like it was surgically removed. It was cut off. There's a little stub of the main body there, but that's about it. And if we looking from this direction, like looking up that way, we're looking west, this is what we'd see. Right afterwards is when this picture was taken. It's just sliced off. And nothing left. Whoops. Didn't go on top, but there's my favorite hole in the street here. But if you start noticing, you start seeing right below the surface pieces of trash, you have cylindrical cutouts all through ground zero. So this is my favorite because the outer wall, that's the southern wall of Tower 2. It leans out into the street a little bit, and notice where it's missing material, right above where that circular cutout is in the middle of Liberty Street. And that hole is empty. Now I call this here hole 2. This is hole 1, hole 2, hole 3. Here they are climbing down into hole 2. All of those cylindrical cutouts sort of coalesced into a large underground open area. This was taken on the 18th of September. There's wet puddles down there these guys are walking through. This is the basement of Tower 2. There's no molten metal in that basement.
What level of the basement?
Pardon me?
What level of the basement?
The bottom. You could count down the levels in there, and that they're walking on horizontal territory there, not anything, sloped and broken up. And like the folks walking around the PATH train station, the loading platform, just wet from all the fire hoses. They're not burning up down there, so it's not real hot. But you don't look for survivors by excavating, because you would damage the people if you're trying to save some bodies. So why is this area open? They didn't excavate it. There's no material there. It just disappeared. Again, this is that zone with a few loose pieces of steel on top of it. Once you remove those, you have the open area. Now we're going to look at hole 1. There, you see some wheat checks that took a dive into the hole. Now, what is this piece of beam here? Why is it rusty like that? It looks kind of like Swiss cheese. Some other odd-looking things, but you can count down to the sub-basements. Look at all the, it is empty. So what made that hole? Here, they're going to rescue Roadrunner. They're down in the mall in the first sub-basement, the first level. Right above this roof, up here, is where the tower supposedly fell. But there's no building 4 above there. This is below the main body of building 4. The toasted cars. Now, my definition of toasted is, it's toast. It's history. It doesn't necessarily mean it's burned. It's just, it's ill-defined. It's just a generic term for, beyond hope. And there's where Tower 1 was. Tower 2. And there's the toasted car lot. They're parked over in here, where they're burning, and this is all paper in between. How did the cars burn up? You can see all paper in between, and the cars just spontaneously combust. Mystery. There it is, just paper and powder. After they got the fires out, those cars stayed there for quite a while, but they instantly rusted. Within a day, bright orange rust. There are some cars on FDR Drive, and folks say, oh, they're towed there. Well, okay, you can say that they're towed there. There's some interesting marks on the pavement that appear that they piled up on FDR Drive, or the road under FDR Drive, actually. But a comment I'd like to make about the towed question is there were 1,400 toasted cars. If someone is going to say that they were damaged next to the World Trade Center and then towed elsewhere, you got to find a place next to the World Trade Center where you can park 1,400 cars. VC Street, how many cars can you fit there?
Somebody would have noticed the being towed.
Correct. So, West Street, we saw pictures from West Street, and there's maybe 1 or 2 cars there, and Liberty Street, a couple of cars there, Church Street. The only street I don't have a thorough sight of what was there is VC Street, under where that overhead walkway garden area was. But how many cars can you fit there? 5, 10, 15? Certainly not 1,400 cars. But not only that, even if this one was towed, what did that to it? It looks like the door wilted. And the most hilarious thing, whatever ate it likes door handles. It gets door handles first and engine blocks. And I don't know how well you can see this, but it's even got the steel belting left, just not the rubber. The rear tire looks just fine. Nice new wax job in the back end, looks fine. So how hot could that car have been without affecting the entire car? The recent California fires, a friend sent me some pictures of some vehicles that were burned up. None of them were rusted. Now, if we have steel, how is it affected by fire? See something going drip, drip, drip? What ate that? Something attacked that postal truck. It looks like it was just eaten on the side, like some monster from somewhere, the lagoon. This truck has another interesting phenomenon that I began to notice. Looks like more than just the paint peeled down, it looks like the outer layer peeled down of this door. And then we have fire trucks missing windows. Nothing else seems to be wrong with them. All the windows are blown. But paper wasn't burned? Why just some places was it burned here and not others? That's a weird pattern to have fire. And what was that? Call it the what's-it car. I've since gotten other photographs of this vehicle, and it's a Con Edison vehicle. Just take my word for it. This vehicle in the middle of the street, this one's quite interesting. Look over the tire through the wheel well. You see daylight. In other words, it doesn't have an engine block. And obviously it was driving down the middle of the street. How did it get there? I don't know what this line is down that vehicle. But these are just bizarre things that you wouldn't expect around a collapse scene. This is Park, the street, which is quite a distance north. It's up in the City Park area by where the Brooklyn Bridge is. Why is this car on fire? And the paper around it isn't. Spontaneous combustion.
Spontaneous auto combustion.
You're Karen, no way.
Oh, it's just, yeah, might happen to me. Even paper in the trees. The whole street full of cars. What happened to this guy's engine? Engine blocks. Whatever it is, it likes to eat engine blocks. And this one, it looks kind of wilted. That ladder's kind of bent over. Folks say, well, something landed on it. Well, where is the something that landed on it? This is on Vesey Street. We saw there was no beams laying on Vesey Street. So where'd the front end go? And this van. This is about a block north of Building 7. No door handles. That was a mail truck behind it. Just take my word for it. But it's already resting on the side of this. And here's more of, I call this the swamp. West Broadway, this is looking south. Down at the end is Building 5 that you see. First thing I noticed is that there's a red light down there. Why is there a traffic light that's working? Notice the fire hose in the street, and it looks like a swamp. The water was working. And just a day or two later, look at this street down here. The most interesting thing is this is where Building 7 was and disappeared. It didn't even spill out across the street. And that bus, that's where it ended up. They moved off to the side and they squashed it down so you might not notice it, so they could clean it up further. How did that street get that way? Here's that street where that cloud was rolling down when Tower 1 went poof. That's the direction the cloud moved in, and after it left, you had toasted cars. So this doesn't look like anything low-tech to me. If you have something that cooks everything in that area would be cooked. You wouldn't have the paper not burned, and other things would be burned. But what things do we know of? What? Chemicals is another thing. But we know there's high-tech things that do different things to different materials.
You mean DOE?
No, we're not going to make any assumptions just yet. We're going to let the data.
The signature reminds me of a guy that was born on a mountaintop in Tennessee. That's what the signatures look like. Like stock and barrel. You've got the inner shearing, you've got the missing pulverization, total missing everything. We know how far the stuff went. Okay? You've got the fires on one side, you've got the molten cars looking on one side, the molten stuff in the inside.
Molten stuff? Wait.
I want to get your comments, but we want to get them recorded. So just hold off.
Did we see any molten things? Well, let's look at technology. And folks say, well, there's nothing like that exists. Well, let's just extrapolate. In 1945, someone came up with this gizmo, microwave oven. It uses some sort of a beam. Not a kinetic energy weapon, but a beam weapon. Then one of these, they're so cheap now that you can use them for ornaments on your keychain. And you have all sorts of wavelengths to pick from, pick and choose, mix and match. Don't you think they've come up with something more since 1955? There's a lot of different kinds of energy waves. What are cell phones? You can trigger things with beams. Now, someone, again, talking about the energy, well, we've all heard about the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. The wind didn't blow hard enough to destroy the bridge. The bridge destroyed itself. So on a fine level, if you can get harmonic. Yeah, if you can get some, it's the natural frequency, excite the natural frequency. But if on the very fine level you could get the molecules excited, maybe you could get the thing to self-destruct. I'm just putting out ideas. And note how this bridge came apart. It came apart in one place first, and it unraveled and destroyed itself. It didn't come down in big chunks. I just think that's an interesting phenomenon. So why isn't this moving? Towards the end of September, this is what the area over Building 2 looked like. I don't call this smoke. I call these fumes. It's just the ground's fuming. If this were smoke, it keeps going up. It's just looming over the pile. There's something going on. And over at Bankers Trust, there's this interesting beam here, shriveled up. It was just a FEMA report, and I would really be interested in talking with the photographer of that picture. Some other interesting cooked-looking beams. And there's our mail truck. Interesting image. This is kind of like Hiroshima here.
Secretary, can I ask you a question about some of the technology that you're developing to fight the war on terror, specifically directed energy and high-powered microwave technology? When do you envision that you can weaponize that type of technology?
Goodness, it is in, for the most part, the kinds of things you're talking about are in varying early stages. Do you have anything you'd add?
I don't think I would add much. I think they are in early stages and probably not ready for employment at this point.
In the normal order of things, when you invest in research and development and begin a developmental project, you don't have any intention or expectations that one would use it. On the other hand, the real world intervenes from time to time, and you reach in there and take something out that is still in a developmental stage, and you might use it. So your question's not answerable. It depends on what happens in the future and how well things move along the track, and whether or not someone feels it's appropriate to reach into a development stage and see if something might be useful, as was the case with the unmanned aerial vehicles.
But you sound like you're willing to experiment with it.
Yeah, I think that's the point, and I think, we have, I think, from the beginning of this conflict, I think General Franks has been very open to looking at new things if there are new things available, and has been willing to put them into the fight even before they've been fully wrung out. And I think that's not referring to these two particular cases of directed energy or high-powered microwave, but sure. And,
yes.
And we will continue to do that.
Pouring out his neck because they're deployed.
And these are a few of the toys that I found. When I started looking at the data around Ground Zero, I didn't know there was such a thing as directed energy weapons. I just looked at the data, and the data told me there was. And so I looked further, and this is kind of interesting. This is very old information, like 10, 15 years old. Interesting gizmos. I wonder what they do. Keep in mind, Once upon a time, there were some buildings standing there, and then they went away. Turning to dust midair. It doesn't look like a collapse to me.
Great pleasure to welcome back Professor Dr. Judy Wood.
Again, part 2. Again, this was not a new Pearl Harbor. This is a new Hiroshima. Proof of concept. Showing off a new toy. Seen that one before. But it's better than this model. This model wiped out everything and wasn't very well controlled as to the after effects, and they couldn't just take out a few buildings without affecting the one across the street. So let's start looking at the dust. We have this picture I call the snowball picture, and this one I call the bubbler, a Midwestern term for drinking fountain. Kind of looks like a bubbler. Those don't look like regular collapses. Is one dust cloud the same as another dust cloud? Are there differences? Let's start looking at the dust and see what we see. Well, here's one thing I started noticing. You have this two-toned color scheme. Dark on top, light on bottom. And then they start mixing up like they were put in a blender. Dark on top, light on bottom. Dark on top, light on bottom. I wonder if there's a significance to that. Well, as I said, I started coming up with a new vocabulary. There'll be a pop quiz at the end. The one that we should pay attention to, though, is dustification. I'm not saying how it was done, the exact mechanism, but something turned a solid building into a bunch of dust, a bunch of powder. So let's start looking at all the different phenomena and seeing what we come up with. Again, we assign just arbitrary terms to each phenomenon so we don't bias our observations. I call this one Alka-Seltzer, or shaving cream. These are the steel wheat checks. They look like wheat checks, those outer column bundles. What is this trailing behind them so energetically? Same with this. With the same picture with motion in it. We see it's a smooth process. It's not a bundle here, bundle there. Oops, I went too fast. So, here we had the towers. This is what's left. Here's building 6. Building 6 towers over the rubble pile. Missing all that material. And we know it didn't go down into the basement because we had those guys walking around looking for Roadrunner. And here are the path trains in February that were pulled out when they dug down to that level. In pristine condition, not a scratch on them. They probably had a few scratches, but they definitely weren't crushed. And that was underneath the area by building 1, between 1 and 2. And the path train actually was what goes under 2. So what I had done when looking through all of the data is just to start categorizing the dust. There's, dust that does one thing, dust that does another thing, and looking at how it changes with time. There's, right after both towers were gone, the wind was blowing towards the south, and north of the towers, you had a clear blue sky. It cleared out pretty quickly. And then the dust started increasing again. That was an interesting phenomenon. We'll get to seeing those pictures. And if the dust immediately settles out, you have a clear blue sky, and then you see dust start rising up from the pavement, what would cause that?
Dust or vapor? More dust?
Dust. It looks like really fine dust. But if it was fine dust settling out of the air, it doesn't settle out in 10 minutes. This is coarse dust that lands and then becomes fine dust. Yes?
My friend who lives there was a witness, and he starts going over his memories. He said his vision or his memory was that it stood like a column, as though there was a column of dust that was standing. Then all of a sudden the wind came in, and the whole thing started blowing away. That was his memory.
One thing I started noticing in watching Rick Siegel's video, his new one, is when the dust, comes down to the ground, pours out. It's very energetic, and then it slows down. It goes as far north as the pedestrian bridge, and I have a video clip of people just walking as the cloud's catching up to them, and then it goes upward. It doesn't keep going out. At that point, it starts boiling upward. So here we have the next stage. We have clouds going upward. Look at all this dust going up and out, and then we have this lighter stuff down below. We have the darker stuff up here, and then it starts moving outward. We're looking north across Statue of Liberty. Apparently the dust cloud was blowing towards Brooklyn that day. Remember that. And here's a view from the north. You can see the heaviest part of the dust cloud. The reason why I say note this is none of the dust samples USGS tested were in this area. They're elsewhere. You'll notice a particular design under areas 1 and 2. They look like little fingers sticking up. Turns out toasted cars were located there. And here's some of those toasted cars. I call this fuming. The car's not on fire. It wasn't burning. It was just becoming fumes. This was on Vesey Street, near the intersection of Church and Vesey. They just turned to dust and instantly rusted. See on the side of that one. Now, looking from the west, looking at West Street, you'll see patches here of dust. There's a car underneath each one of those denser dust columns. And you can see some brighter spots over in here where this is around the corner from where the cars were on fire. So here we are. The toasted lot hasn't quite gotten toasted yet. Here comes the cloud. Well, this cloud is from Tower 2 because Tower 1 is still standing. For whatever reason, the cloud from Tower 2 did not toast those cars. There it comes, goes on through. And you can see from this picture, there's the toasted lot. It's not on fire. But here's where Tower 1 goes poof. The numbers is hard to keep track of. Tower 2 went poof first, then Tower 1. And here's the toasted lot over there. It's about to get toasted. Again, before, and then soon to be after. And here's where it rolled down West Broadway. Now you can tell this is a dust cloud from Tower 1 because Tower 2 went this far, right to that point. But you'll see in dust patterns later that that's where Tower 1 went to, about a block difference. Gee, what was the distance the two towers were from these points? It's interesting. It goes out just that far, but notice how abruptly the dust from Tower 2 stopped. Like it has the exact distance it goes before it moves upward. Here is the cloud rolling out, and here's another image of dust from Tower 1. It comes out, this is looking from the west across the Hudson. It comes out like it's penned in, right to the edge of those buildings. It never spills over onto the grass over here. If you had a pizza pan or a cookie tray dropped on a pile of dust in the middle of your basement, you'd have a poof go out, and you'd have denser here, less dense, and less dense, and it'd have a decay kind of density that wouldn't just abruptly stop. So there's the pedestrian bridge there, and this is looking from the west. It's approximately at that point. That's where the cloud from Tower 1 stopped.
The EPA did find spotty levels of asbestos. A sample on a police car turned out
this
dangerous.
Is from a news
Another
video
sample a couple of blocks away,
right
not
after 9/11.
dangerous. But most interesting, in the mix, they are looking, they think, at specks of steel that used to be beams and elevators, marble from the lobby floor and facings. So what were once the strongest architectural elements in the two towers were pulverized, large portions turned into clouds like this one. Still, there is this mystery. If some of the hardest materials were vaporized, how...
The cloud stops right at the pedestrian walkway. We'll see that clip again later on. So we're looking from the south. Right where this outer bit of land stops, that's where the pedestrian walk bridge is. And this was all covered with dust, and then it moved southward. Again, here
the EPA did find spotty levels of asbestos. A sample on a police car turned out dangerous. Another sample a couple of blocks away, not dangerous. But most interesting in the mix, they are looking, they think, at specks of steel that used to be beams and elevators, marble from the lobby floor and facings. So what were once the strongest architectural elements in the two towers were pulverized, large portions turned into clouds like this one. Still, there is this mystery. If some of the hardest materials were vaporized, how...
Yeah, how come we have so much paper? Very good question. So here again is West Broadway before and after. And here's where a bunch of toasted cars were. They weren't toasted with the cloud from Tower 2. But over in here, the cloud from Tower 2 did toast the cars, and you have a lot of fuming of cars over in that area. We're again looking down West Broadway at the street level, the swamp I call it, and there's a lot of toasted vehicles here. Close up, more toasted vehicles. I don't know if you can see that this is already rusted. They almost instantly rusted, so we'll put that down in our data list. Missing door handles again. And someone commented that this doesn't look right for a car fire. Car fires look like they have a lot of soot and junk on them. Right. That doesn't mean this picture is wrong. It means that it might be a different process than a typical fire. And this poor car back here is missing its engine block again. And we have, again, our intersection where the toasted lot is here. Tower 1 stood there. And you can see the fuming back behind Building 7. Bunch of cars back there were fuming. They're just turning into fumes and disintegrating. That West Street, VC Street intersection was just quite intriguing because it was just covered with paper. I call this Mr. Branford. He's in a lot of pictures. I don't know his name. It just has Branford on the back of his jacket. This is a very interesting picture. These people were in their cubby holes hiding, and they just come out of hiding. And look at this guy's posture. Oh my gosh, where did it go? Tower 1 is no longer there. And they're just, like this guy with his arms folded. Just, what happened? They're shocked. They don't know what to think. Yeah, it would be a little bit bothersome that there was a tower there when you came in the morning. And here's Mr. Branford standing there. Looking across VC Street, there's the toasted car lot. It's about a couple blocks or a long block away, but they're waiting in paper. And just to the left is Building 6, and on the other side of Building 6 is where Tower 1 was. I don't see anything else in the street. No, the paper is not burning. So was it hot? We've all seen these cloud chase pictures. This is VC Street, where that's Building 7 a couple blocks away. So this cloud is chasing these people down. Here we are east of the complex by a few blocks, people getting chased down by clouds. Did we ever see any toasted bodies left on the street when the cloud passed? This is the swamp, West Broadway, that had all those toasted cars. It was covered with people moments beforehand. We didn't see any toasted bodies. People didn't get toasted there. So we have these fumes going up into the upper atmosphere. Looks like this in the 12th, looks like that in the 13th. How do clouds move? This is Kuwait oil fired. And things do go in the upper atmosphere, but that's very fine particulate from burning. It doesn't look like this. This is white. This is from the 12th, from a satellite image. Notice how it goes straight and then it has a kink in it and then just kind of dissipates. I think it does that at a particular elevation. When it gets really high up, there's not enough atmosphere to have wind. And this is the next day. You get this bluish haze that keeps pouring upward. That's from, I believe, the International Space Station took this picture. Now we'll go back to that VC West intersection. I call this the slot. It's this opening in the middle of the street that goes down into a tunnel. Nobody's in there right now. This is right after Tower 1 went away. People are just exploring it. Soon after that, there's this picture by the Library of Congress. Very interesting picture. I came up with the term fuzzy blobs. You'll notice these little fuzzy clouds, like one's right there behind the water cooler. And then you see this guy holding his nose. There's another one down here in the slot. And then this poor fellow, I wonder if he inhaled one. It doesn't look like he's doing too well. There's a lot of other ones around in there, but what are those? I've termed them fuzzy blobs. Maybe they attack steel. Maybe there's something in them that's activated. Here's one eating the bottom of the mail truck. Whoops, I'm going to pass this in. Here's a bunch of, I call that fuming, but there's a little bit of fuzzy blobs also on this side. That's the slot, looking backwards.
And are these pictures the day of the...
I've got the date on a lot of them. This one is from 9/11, and that's on 9/11. Because this is Building 7 here, so we know it's on 9/11 because it's still standing. And then looking out across, this was from the 13th. That's the West Street with that few floors of wheat checks from the western wall of Tower 1 laying out there in the street. But we see this fuming down here. And look at this, in October, we still have fuming from Tower 1. My, do we have fuming. Now, is that steam from all the molten metal? But wouldn't these guys look kind of cooked at this point? Some more images from the 31st of October. Look at all this fuming from the ground. If those who planned this event knew about this after effect, they'd need a cover story, wouldn't they? What's interesting is this picture is slightly different than this one. It's not constant. It sputters. Also, the arm of this digger is got a different amount of stuff on it. So apparently the stuff's moving around. I noticed they have a hose here, a line that's sprinkling water over, keeping it down. Must be heat. Again, fuming pictures. And I call this nano haze. It's just the material appears to break down finer and finer until it just starts floating.
Have you read any reports of the smell?
I have read some reports of an odd smell, but I'm not sure what it means. But I would love to hear from people who have smelled it and how they describe it.
Well, I'm one of those people.
Great.
Yes. Didn't smell like a burning building. It was very painful to the microphone.
Yeah.
This is great. Thank you.
Well, I smelled it every day and night until December of that year, and it didn't have a smell like a regular burning building. It was very painful to the nose. At the time, I was thinking, am I smelling asbestos, fiberglass, what is this? But never smelled it before or since.
Describe its texture, aroma, comparison.
Quite, I would say, it was more the sensual feel of it more than the smell. It was very painful, a sharp, it was more of a a pain than
like the
a smell.
we saw who was holding his nose?
Yes, exactly.
And you compare it to something else.
It had some components of a burning building. Those were kind of in the background. And even on the first few days, we could smell the burning bodies. But really, in December, it was just, we lived about a mile from ground zero, and it was so strong that we couldn't hang out on our fire escape. It pushed us in off the fire escape.
Did you cough with your throat?
Oh, I didn't, yes, I had sinus reactions, pretty serious.
Willing to state your name?
Tracy Blevins. Go ahead, Peg.
I just wanted to share my experience of the crate, whatever you might call it. I call it stench or whatever. There was some people that said we should go down. There was all the clubs in that area were closed, and so there was a man who was like a party promoter or whatever, and he's I don't know if anyone's heard him, but he's John Perry Barlow. And so he said, come to this friend of his club. And it was only a couple weeks later, I stayed in my apartment and just taped the windows closed because I was concerned about having, getting exposed to any kind of toxins. But I decided just to do it and go down there because I guess everyone was very depressed and just to be with other people. And the club had air cleaning devices, so you could only smell that when you were, they turned those on for the party. So you could only smell the smell when you're outside. And I had a reaction which was that whenever I smelled that smell, my throat would become extremely irritable, and I would feel like my glands would start to swell. My glands in my throat would immediately start to swell. And so anyway, I had a drink there. I had Lagavulin. I'd never tried it before, and there was a certain taste in it, and it was like it tasted just like the smell. Okay, so I thought, I guess it's really benign after all. I guess it's just like a peaty smell, or it's like a peaty thing that you might get out of a cask from of a scotch. And I thought that was what Lagavulin tasted like. And then, later, maybe some weeks later, actually downtown, I was laughing about it. I said, it tastes just like the smell. And people were looking at me like, you're crazy. Why are you even drinking it? But I guess I'm very slow. I hadn't figured that out. And so I tasted it another time. I tasted Scotch downtown Lagavulin, and it had the same taste. And my theory is that the corks were off. They had the whole, so that obviously somehow it had gotten into the drink, whatever it was. Because later, maybe a few months later, I tried it uptown, and I realized that the Lagavulin doesn't have that flavor in it, for what it's worth. And so.
Would you say the smell could be like a moldy, musty kind of smell? No.
That was the idea. It wasn't exactly like that, but it could pass for something like peaty or musky.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's very informative, very helpful. Thank you very much. We talk more about that.
Why did it change Tracy's hair and not Peggy's?
It does some strange things.
How do you know it wasn't the other way around?
Well, folks talk about it. Many of my photos have this like orangish tint to them, the ones I got from the FEMA site. Here's the picture I was describing while we're waiting for the reboot. This is about a block or so north of the WTC complex, and you can see the toasted cars over there in the lot burning away. So it isn't a whole lot after Tower 1 went poof. The sky is clear blue, but if you notice, around the feet of these people, you see this fine, fuzzy dust. I term that fuzzy fuzzballs. That's different than fuzzy blobs. Fuzzy blobs are eating on things. Fuzzballs are just this cloudy thing around the feet. You could say, okay, these people are just stirring up dust that's already settled out, fine powder. How could it have settled out that fast? The cars are just getting up to speed with their burning. So why would you have dust settling out of the air down to the ground?
You can have dust settling out very rapidly under the influence of electrostatic fields.
And then immediately it starts coming up?
No, I wouldn't think so.
Now the change says something is changing with the whatever it is that's on the ground. Here's a lot more pictures of these fuzzballs. Just where the feet are, and again, that is so fine, it couldn't have settled out. It's rising up, as though the material could maybe continue to be breaking down. Big dust landed quickly, and then started breaking down into finer and finer dust till it starts floating upward. It's so fine.
Judy?
Yes?
In the nanoparticle range, gravity and motion keeps the particles
Suspended. That's what this appears to be. But it didn't start out that way, that it broke down.
Gravitational forces don't operate on nanoparticles.
And that's what I'd say this data looks like. And here's the transition between the fuzzballs at the feet and then turning into the ground fuming. Between this picture on the left and the picture on the right, notice it's coming up all by itself. It doesn't need the feet to stir it up. Found this picture. I thought this was interesting. Hiroshima. Look at the fuming. Just for food for thought. Oh, I mentioned this being 9/11 being the new Hiroshima. You know what the new Nagasaki was? Anthrax. The 1-2 punch. Here's the street, cleaned. Street sweepers out scrubbing the streets, in the way, impeding emergency vehicles. Aren't they down there looking for survivors? No, they're scrubbing the streets first. And here in this picture on the right, it looks like they scrubbed it with a toothbrush. Out here, but there is some crud over here. It's very clean. But on 9/11, they started cleaning the streets, or at least wetting down this fuming. People might start asking questions. You can use the molten metal myth at ground zero, but this is a block or two north. Why are the streets fuming? Better scrub them down quickly. And you've got a hose job. Continually. The streets were clean enough to eat off of. Constant scrubbing. But notice there's some haze in the background. There's always this fumes coming up. More street scrubbing. At a construction site, why don't you wait until you're all cleaned up and then scrub the streets? But they're fuming. You scrub them, nobody notices they were fuming. But what do you do with the lawn, the front yard? You bring in potting soil. This is in front of one of the WFC buildings that was across the street from Tower 1. This looks like brand new potting soil brought in. Why would they dump that on the front yard? There was a terrace, a little bit of a terrace lawn out front. Yeah, that's too good. They're planning on doing some, landscaping. How did the dirt get inside that fire truck? It's, inside the cab. Of course, we don't know what happened to the engine block here either. And all this dirt spilling out. And then we have the bucket brigade. I do not know what in this bucket is so important that they need this bucket brigade. But look what they're standing on. Dirt. Brand new dirt. Lots of dirt. But where did it come from? The plaza level of the WTC. This is over by, I think that's building 5 and building 4 in the background. We're out standing over the plaza level area. And where's all this dirt from? Mountains of dirt. Look at this dirt. A nice pile. This is from the 13th. Just here and here, but not where the fresh dirt is. Huh. Cover them with dirt. And another thing, this looks like it came from a landfill. You have pens and pencils and office-looking stuff. Hey, that looks like you should have left over from Tower 1 or Tower 2. So it has a couple of purposes there. And now you start...
Judy, are you saying somebody brought that in or it just appeared there?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the pictures, just noticing this. The plot thickens. We also notice these pieces of steel. Or what are they? Steel doesn't rust that fast. This looks like it was spray painted Rust-Oleum orange. Now, if it was really hot and we had molten metal down there, why isn't this dog's feet getting burned? He doesn't seem to be having a problem with it. And another thing that's interesting, look on this guy's face mask. He's got a little monitor. See what he's breathing. Some people got to have monitors and other ones didn't. Now this picture on the 14th shows they had a big rainstorm that day. This was the northern walkway that went from WFC3 over to Tower 1 and Building 6. That's Building 6, Tower 1 was here. This is the pedestrian walkway. This is what it looked like on 9/11. This is what it looked like on the 14th. Just 3 days later. Where's all this dirt coming from? Tremendous amount of dirt. Did they have already potted plants, landscaping inside the walkway? How could people walk across? Now, there's another interesting thing I started noticing. The rubble pile of Tower 1 started getting bigger. This guy's up there, I could say, guarding his dirt pile. But it's getting bigger, and it's just packed with dirt. Here's that picture. Let's compare this picture with this one. This is where Tower 3 was. We're looking from West Street. At Tower 3, Tower 2 was in the background. This is from 9/16, 5 days after 9/11, and here we are, like 3 weeks later, in October. If you look carefully, that dirt pile has gotten bigger. If you were walking along the ground, we're going to get up on top of this building, you'd have trouble climbing up. Here, there's a nice smooth slope of dirt going up to the top. And you have, I call them diggers. These, they're correct as grapplers, but that's my generic term for all of them. But there's like 5 of them in this picture. What are they picking up and moving around? They're not loading stuff in a truck to haul away. They're just pushing dirt around. Compare that zone with that zone. And looking west across ground zero, all new dirt. And that's the 13th. When did it appear? Let's see if I... This is Rudy Giuliani the next morning after 9/11, on the morning of the 12th.
We were able to move 120 dump trucks out of the city last night, which will give you a sense of the work that was done overnight. So some of the debris has already been removed. More of it is being removed, and it'll be done by barge all throughout the day today.
People saw dump trucks coming and going all night long. Oh, they had to have been removing debris. That's what it seems like that was a cover story being planted. Why are you removing debris before you rescue people? Because once you start dislodging things in the pile, they're going to shift and you're going to squash any possible survivors. And it almost sounded like we'll have it all done by the end of the day, by barge. Maybe he was expecting less material to be left. Trucking in the dirt. Here comes the dirt. This is from FEMA, these pictures. This is a blow-up of this zone here. They don't fill the trucks all the way to the top, so if you're walking along the sidewalk and look up, it looks like an empty truck. And it's covered with a tarp. And this is the dirt getting trucked out, like, changing diapers. You bring the dirt in, take out used dirt, bring in new dirt, And it looks like, especially, and this one has just, random debris in it, but all the trucks in front of it, it looks like a smooth bread loaf. Nice, smooth dirt.
Those yellow trucks down on the bottom, those are headed towards the World Trade Center?
Yeah, this is headed south on West Street. The World Trade Center's down in here. Because here's this, you can see this building is up on West Street, a couple blocks north. So they're headed towards the World Trade Center, all loaded. This is a few blocks east of the World Trade Center. World Trade Center is up this way. This is VC Street. If you walk along here, Church Street's up right about there. And this is soon after things were getting moved around, and the street is all covered with dust, except for the tire tracks from this 18-wheeler. Look where he's coming from. You can see the direction he's moving in. He came from north of the complex, heading southward. Why would he be coming that direction and it's loaded down with, looks like dirt? Now, I think Jim made a good observation. Maybe it was wet dirt and the water's leaking out, and that's what's helping the tire tracks kind of be so pronounced there. But you can tell which direction he's moving in. Let's look at WFC1. That's World Financial Center 1. This is just a little bit south of the Liberty and West intersection. Here we have, right after the event, there's a flip car belly up. This vehicle looks disturbed, shrunken on the front end, weird appearance. We notice that all of the facade around the doorway, there was the same material. I don't know if it's ceramic or marble or glass, whatever that facade was, it all was affected equally. None of the rest of the facade was affected except the windows. All the windows blown. No stab wounds from projectiles, just the windows gone. And then the next picture, they have the debris moved away. And then the next picture, they bring in new dirt. And then a little bit later, this is from the 23rd. Here's some yellow bulldozers scooping up that dirt, scooping up the entire terrace and moving it out. Here's WFC. Right up to it, you can see those yellow bulldozers scooping up the terrace. So why did they bring in new dirt, scoop it up, and haul it back out? Oh, let's see. Notice the median strip. Same thing happened to it. It all got cleaned off. That's raw dirt there. And again, compare these two times and notice how the pile got more dirt on it. It grew over the next 3 weeks. Okay, now we're going to go down into the basement of Tower 1 as it's been excavated down. I forgot, I think this is the end of October. And I call this the Gestapo picture. This guy looks like he's guarding her. Water hoses being dumped on the fumes. And the ground is so saturated, the water is leaching out into this puddle. There's a close-up, and this one I've lightened so you see it better. But that's a puddle there.
Nice rainbow.
Oh, yeah, beautiful. And again, look at these nice rusty columns. Those are the core columns. Where did all that dirt come from anyway?
Excuse me, I'm missing something. When you're talking about they're moving dirt out and moving dirt in, what kind of dirt are they moving in? Like gravel or something?
This is like potting soil. Maybe it comes from a landfill. It could be, it's nice, rich-looking dirt. Like it could be good potting soil, or some of it looks like it could come from a landfill. I'm just looking at the pictures of what I see. Now this looks like regular dirt here. They bring it in, dump it down, and then within a week scoop it up and move it back out and bring some more in.
It reminds me of Chernobyl a little bit.
Is that how they clean that up?
Well, I guess there's massive contamination. They're bringing things in. As I recall, bringing them out, the contamination is so widespread.
I understand that dirt is one way of taking care of treating contaminated areas.
Propose the idea of burying the entire sarcophagus of the Chernobyl reactor in sand as a long-term solution to prevent further radioactive dust from emerging in the event of an earthquake.
Whew. Here's a close-up shot of this. You can see this dirt is totally saturated to the point the water is running off into this puddle. Now, if we had molten metal under there, does that make sense? Covered with wet dirt. So what do you think this material is over here? Steam? I don't think so. Now here it is in March. Look over in the corner. Still fuming. They had gotten all of this dirt and it made a ramp to drive over the other side. That was the equipment that was starting to damage things. But again, lots of dirt piles. They're hosing down things over where the digger is working. Cheetos. I call this this section Cheetos, because this looks like a Cheeto. Yeah, this is the British version, these French fries. But that looks like a Cheeto. Could that be molten metal? Is there any possibility it could be molten metal? Let's take another closer look at this. See, I think I have audio to do here. Oh, not yet. This, if in the hydraulics of this digger, we have up here this silvery part that slides inside the bigger part. If this were really hot down here, this part's going to expand, and it's not going to be able to slide inside that part. You're going to break the seals for the hydraulics, and everything's going to seize up.
But won't that take time? You get a big thermal capacity for that whole assembly.
How much heat with time?
Somebody can calculate that.
How hot can, how much temperature can this thing operate in? Well, let's look at the data. This is for hydraulics, the operating temperatures. And it's a lot like the oil in your car engine. You know, you've heard of 10W40? Well, it goes from viscosity 10 to 40 from the two temperature ranges, from starting up cold to when it runs hot. And you don't want it to be too thin at high temperatures. So what does that tell you? Well, the maximum, generally, operating temperature is 82 degrees centigrade. After that point, you permanently damage the equipment. Or 180 Fahrenheit. What temperature is your oven when you cook cookies? A lot more than 180. It's like 360. So you can't get one of those diggers and reach in your oven and pull out something without damaging it. It definitely isn't going to reach in and pull out molten metal. Because if you're digging down into wherever the molten metal is, it has to be submerged in that heat. At least something greater than 180 Fahrenheit. And if the digger is parked on top of a hot pile, it's already overheated. So here's the highest operating temperature down here. They gave this range in this different mechanical engineering handbooks, and this one came from the web. It's on my website. Now, what temperature would you say this item is if this picture was real? If it were real, okay, I'd say it's, light yellow, lemon, orangish, that range, like 1,000 degrees centigrade. That's a lot more than 82. Not even close. And this is the lower limit for viscosity. This is 140 down here, this highest end here. So you need it to be like way out here, and there's no hydraulic oil that functions at that temperature. Perhaps we are the victims of PSYOPs, all of us. Perception management. Here we have this picture, and later one appeared on the internet looking this way. And we were told they're peering into molten metal. Well, if you look carefully, this fellow here is standing down in a hole. Is he waiting in molten metal? And you see this fellow has a flashlight or something in his back pocket sticking up that doesn't appear here. Also, the colors being different. But if that were molten metal, and those guys stuck their faces down in there, they wouldn't have any faces left. But who wants to sit and think about that? No, we just say molten metal and go on. How we are introduced to images counts. First impressions stick. On 9/11, there's a lot of questions everybody had. We were given answers instantly, and heck, we don't want to, think about 9/11 again. It's such a horrible situation. You don't want to look back, so you just take the answer you're given and run with it. And it keeps getting repeated over and over again. The first time I saw this image, I was shown this one. February 1st, 2006. And I was told this was evidence of thermite. But if you look at the actual picture, where the contrast hasn't been adjusted, here you don't even get to see that the spire is turning to dust. But it trains people to, when they see this picture, see the actual thing, they're going to say, oh, that's proof of thermite. They've memorized it. They were conditioned into it. They were tricked. Let's see, I'm going to back up on this one. This is a video clip from a news broadcast the next day from the 12th of September. Scott Pelley asked these two doctors, where are the bodies? And the first one, you can see the horror go through his face. He just doesn't want to accept what happened. So he makes up an engineering answer that does not make sense. He needed an explanation. The PSYOPs team hadn't given one to him yet. So he made up his own, and you can see how badly he needs it to hold on to some sense of reality. And if everyone was in that vulnerable state that day, they were very vulnerable to suggestions like this.
Dr. Tony Daher, he and his partner, Dr. Lincoln Cleveland, are emergency room physicians from New York University Hospital downtown.
We saw all our casualties yesterday at our hospital stopped at about noon.
It got really strange and very spooky. Things just stopped coming in that had anything to do with the blast. And, you know, at the time I was thinking you can read a couple things into that. Either people are buried and they're going to start bringing bodies out, or just everybody died.
Where are all the people who were in these buildings?
The buildings were built, the structural support of the building is the shell, is the skin of the building. I remember when they were built. I'm a New Yorker. The innovative architecture of it is that the outer shell is where the strength of it is, and I think what happened is the whole thing imploded. It was like a chute that went straight down.
What does that mean to the inside?
It means that the explosion has nowhere to go except down. I think another building collapses, there's toppling, pieces fall off, there's a diffusion of the energy, and in this collapse, the energy all went straight down. And I think that, tragically, anybody in that chute did not survive. I think it probably had the force of close to a nuclear blast.
These firemen from Brooklyn have been taking the mountain down piece by piece, and many of them share the pessimism of the doctors.
It's what?
Just huge rubble.
Do you see anything of the victims, of the people who were in the building?
There's 110 stories on top of everybody over there. It's just tough to say.
110 stories on top of everybody.
That's what the two buildings were. If we get a shot, you'll see the antenna that was on top of the tower. It's at ground level.
And yet there are no people to be seen.
They pulled out a couple of Port Authority cops alive.
Right, last night?
Last night, this morning. Suppose they were like on the 80th floor from what we heard. But that's it so far.
I was here when they extricated the police officer at 8 o'clock this morning, who was in very good shape, actually, amazingly enough. I think right now it's just going to be a very slow process of digging through rubble.
You know, Doctor, it seems to me that it must be very frustrating to be a physician and to have really so few patients to treat here.
You know, I don't know the numbers yet, but I certainly hope that means that a lot of people made it out alive. And obviously it's horrific and incredible tragedy for those people who lost their lives.
What do you make of this?
Words fail. Words fail.
So those are real people. How they reacted. No one had fed them a story yet. And they were grasping for a story. So if we have a whole nation or a whole world that's grasping for a story and they're given one, they're going to grab it and not look back because it's such a horrible scene. They don't want to have to relive it again. Now, this particular one...
This was the South Tower.
This particular one is what I call a PSYOPs video. It's to reinforce the molten metal myth that got introduced somehow at some point. I want to make it clear that in no way do I think any of the emergency workers were lying when they said they saw molten metal. They were conditioned to say that, and everybody was saying it, and everyone kept assuming that that's what it was, and they just moved on, and it became this myth. But if we look at the evidence, it does not support the idea of molten metal. And as you look at the words, imagine, does this make sense? Or think about it. Now, if you're going to pull a good PSYOPs, you start out with saying something honest, because the first impression of someone, they're wondering, is this person someone I can trust or not? If they say the right thing, I'm going to trust them. And then they move into something else that's kind of odd. That's just a good rule of thumb. But this is an interesting boost for molten metal.
This was the South Tower. This was 104, 106 stories tall.
There's no tall.
This is what is left. Up there was the North Tower. And you look, and you see, and there's no concrete. There's very little concrete. All you see is aluminum and steel. What happened to the concrete? The concrete was pulverized. And I was down here Tuesday.
He's trying to tell us that all the dust is concrete.
Planet. All of Lower Manhattan, not just this site.
Pardon me?
Put the speaker in front of the mic.
Ah, a good idea. Thanks. Let's see, I gotta make this longer. Ah, there we go. Yeah, he's trying to tell us it's just the concrete that turned into the dust.
This was the South Tower. This was 104, 106 stories tall. This is what is left. Up there was the North Tower. And you look, and you see, and there's no concrete. There's very little concrete. All you see is aluminum and steel. What happened to the concrete? The concrete was pulverized. And I was down here Tuesday, and it was like you were on a foreign planet. All of Lower Manhattan, not just this site, from river to river, there was dust powder 2-3 inches thick. The concrete was just pulverized. And what's to explain, Governor, the smoke that still comes out? There's still fire down below. There is such an incredibly deep pile of rubble, and the tower goes down 5-6 stories underground, that there is still fire underneath.
This is how it's been since day one. Oh, it's unbelievable. And this is 6 weeks later, almost 6 weeks later. And as we get closer to the center of this, it gets hotter and hotter. It's probably 1,500 degrees. We've had some small windows into what we thought was a core at some point, and it looked like an oven. You know, it was just roaring inside. And it's just a bright reddish orange color. See that stuff he's pulling out? What was that shit? We're gonna hold off on the water. See the stuff he's pulling out? Yeah. Red hot. If we hit it too much steam, you won't be able to see what he's doing. Great. You see how this debris is still smoking? That's when the fires that are still burning. 8 weeks later, we still got fires burning. Every now and then, one of the pieces of equipment will dig in, will open up a small area, the oxygen will rush in, and you'll get this plume of brown, black smoke coming up. That's because that fire just got more oxygen. So, I mean, these things are burning. At one point, I think they were about 2,800 degrees.
Underground fires, ignited by burning jet fuel, smoldered for months, fed by molten steel and buried carpeting, office furniture, wood paneling, and paper.
Steel-toed boots is one of the biggest things. Out, still on the rubble, it's still, I believe, 1,100 degrees. The guy's boots just melt within a few hours.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails. Like you're in a foundry.
Yeah, like lava. A volcano.
One of the more unusual artifacts to emerge from the rubble is this rock-like object that has come to be known as the meteorite.
But if the boots are steel-toed boots are standing, melting, how hot does your oven need to be for the steel to melt? And what would happen to your feet, in there? Yeah, incinerated. But she's not lying. She's repeating what she believes because that's what she was told and never thought twice about it. We have an entire nation that fell into that routine, entire world. And it gets repeated and repeated and repeated. Folks forget to stop and think. But I'm asking all of you to stop and think. Could those feet be in boots that are melting, where the steel is melting?
If it is a psyops, why are they lying about the high temperature?
Because people accept it and move on. Now, why did the people need an answer? What was the question? The boots were disintegrating, maybe. And the worker wanted to know why his boots disintegrate after 2 hours. They tell him that is the molten metal underground. They don't tell him it's molecular dissociation that's affecting his boots. Whatever it is that's happening has contaminated the boots, and the steel in his boots might be getting affected.
I think one of the most interesting things when you talk to Willie Rodriguez and the police and fire guys, there were no fires in the stairwells, there were no fires in the elevators, there were no lower fires in the tower whatsoever when they were going up there doing the rescue. So in the fuel, you got 8,000 gallons of JP4. That stuff's gone instantaneously. So you don't have it rushing down and burning everything. So when you talk to the guys who were there, talk to Willie, stuff doing the rescues, there was no fire down there.
In fact, there was a huge amount of water down there.
Well, after they ran the fire hoses.
But the fire hoses weren't even up at the top. Some of the stuff was going, but it just wasn't happening.
Somebody has a question back here.
Plenty of people talking about the boots.
Yeah.
Has anybody who had foot injuries?
No. I haven't heard of anybody who had burns on their feet.
No, I didn't.
And yeah.
Are you going to explain what it is then?
Yeah, we'll continue on here. So here we have this grill, this is steel with a regular, office fire. So what, office fires don't melt steel, much less steel-toed boots. Now here's Rudy Giuliani talking about something.
There were fires of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit below the ground. I could be standing here and you could be standing there. And I could be describing to you, Governor, the site, and then a fire would break out in between us. And it was just by luck or the design of God that we weren't killed.
He's got a built-in thermometer.
Yeah, just where was Rudy Giuliani?
It was hell almost opening up.
Yeah. So we saw this picture. How do we know that was real? How do we know if it was a psyops? A week later, they have another picture, and it doesn't show anything hot. Well, if it was hot here, it's cooled off immediately, so why do we have the story about things continuing to be hot? Plus, we have this guy climbing down into the ground right at that place. That's right where they were. That's the hole number 2. That's a map of it. And that's on the 18th, 2 days after this picture, and well before this picture was taken. Molten metal? I don't know if you're familiar with this that happened over a week ago. The steam explosion in New York. And the poor fellow who was at the wrong place at the wrong time with his truck here. Now we have a video. Notice this fireman is not walking into that. The fellow who is in that tow truck, 3rd-degree burns over 80% of his body and was intensive care. I hope he is hanging on, but it didn't look very good, what I read in the paper. Water hits something hot, it explodes. It expands by a factor of 1,600. That's how come pressure cookers give off steam when you cook food. On the afternoon of 9/11, there was a water main that broke on West Street, made this lake. There's a guy wading out into the middle of the lake. Where's the steam explosion? Now, do you think these guys are walking out in the middle of steam? But the cover story convinced us that that's perfectly normal for fires that are burning for 99 days. They need that cover story. But from what I see here, these guys are not hot. There's something else. And people would have been asking questions. What is that coming out of the ground? That's a lot of fuming going on. If they're standing on a grill, wouldn't they look more like a grilled cheese sandwich? And this is the end of October. There's some pretty serious fuming going on. They're wetting it down, but those diggers are still operational, so that can't be that hot. And the guy in the cab can't be that hot. From the 15th, you have what looks like steam shooting out. Remember the 14th, it rained. It's dry on the 15th. You have this steam-looking stuff. On the 20th, it's raining. No steam. And you have wet puddles over all of the beams. So as for molten metal, I would question that. This takes a little bit to load. But at a time when we're all vulnerable, just like we're given the names of 19 bad guys with box cutters. Did anybody question that? The saddest part I had on 9/11 was before noon, my graduate student came up to me and said, "Dr. Wood, who's bin Laden and what's Al-Qaeda? How come they had these names already?" As I think Morgan Reynolds will show us tomorrow, they had the crime solved in less than 60 seconds.
On the news today, they said it would take a year to solve what happened to the bridge in Minneapolis.
Or even 2 years.
But notice the FBI declared it couldn't be terrorism instantly.
Yeah, right, immediately. They don't know what caused it, but it couldn't be terrorism.
Blackwater is not a terrorist. It's
us. Terrorists are us. Right?
So there's this other aspect, fuming rust. This is a picture from FEMA. We know it's not hot because those diggers wouldn't be working. Here we have steel that turns to rust. I think we all know that steel, eventually it rusts with creeping crud kind of on it, but it doesn't instantly rust. What do we know that instantly rusts? Iron. Like an iron skillet sitting in your sink overnight with water in it is bright orange. But this is steel. It's not iron. Why does it look like iron? The plot thickens. Just like instantly. I wonder if the digger holding the glowing molten metal, the Cheeto picture, is to train us to see molten metal when we see orange pipes that are rusty. How does the front end of this truck become instantly rusted in some places, not where all the dents are? Some of the places is missing paint, but it didn't rust. It's just instant rust. The office fires don't do that. It's a chemical plant fire in China. Does it look familiar? See this little fire down here, and you get the orange. Right after 9/11, this is the first day FEMA uploaded pictures for 9/11. Look at this fire truck, and this is bright orange coil of something here that's rusty. Rusty here. Every bit of steel is turned to rust that you see.
Are you presenting FEMA pictures as perception or reality?
I'm looking at all the pictures in totality and looking at the consistency. There's various folks that took different pictures at different times, different groups. If private individuals took pictures that showed the same thing, this instant rust seems very consistent across the board. And this particular fire truck was filmed by different people. This is just private individuals had taken these other pictures. This is the FEMA picture. Very rusty, and that's like right afterwards, within a few days. 1 to 2 days. Here's a picture of a steel pipe that's orange rust. I cut out the top left-hand quadrant so you can see an enlargement. The bottom of this pipe is not rusty. Could it be there's some sort of a cloud wherever it bumps into something that rusts, and this other kind of cloud that is not activated doesn't do that? So maybe we have activated clouds. And just out of interest, I decided I would try a tacky Photoshop job, and I highlighted all items in this picture that were that color, and then tweaked the color scheme. But you notice these little specks in various places of where it's that color, that rust color. Back to the toasted cars. Instant rust. This particular car here is parked under FDR Drive. Why is the inside of that car, it looks totally toasted, but why is it rusty? And bright orange rust here. And this is looking down through the swamp, down West Broadway again. Notice how this has that peeling look to it. This bus down there, something funny going on with the roof. It looks like it's pooched out, kind of fatter on either side. And there's a car down here. The color doesn't show up so well in this picture, but it's rusty already. Right there. We get a closer look at it later. But see, the bus isn't so pooched out up there anymore. Something continued to deteriorate, it appears. From the USGS study, they were going to show us, the content of ferric and ferrous dust. One thing I picked out of their text, notice they accidentally called it iron, the iron beams. And I've seen other people in the 9/11 movement call steel beams iron. But iron rapidly rusts. Steel does not. Steel is also much stronger than iron. That's why they use structural steel to build buildings and don't use iron. From satellite imagery, this is without the background grayscale map, you can see ground zero and how the dust was left pretty much in the way we saw that cloud move. Guess what? They didn't collect dust samples from that region much. So what did their dust readings look like? And here's the various sample points. You notice how there aren't any really here? But where its pink zones are, that's where I know there's toasted cars. There's none of those toasted car places where they took dust samples. Now, they did this quantitative analysis on one chart saying, lots, moderate amount, trace, and not detectable. And I colored these dots. Blue is the highest, then it goes down to white, the bottom, or white is unreported also. So you notice this color scheme, lots of yellow up here, red kind of there. Then this is see the black area? I superimposed it with the smoke map of where the smoke plume went. You notice there's not many data sample points here. Then they also did a quantitative set of data. And they have, these numbers. I tried to make the color scale similar. And here's where those points lie. How did those two compare? Well, I put them in an ordered list and then tried to compare the same point on one scale was down here and on the other scale it was there. There's no correlation. They should kind of follow the same trend. But it just seemed kind of random. And these weren't even reported on by the set of blue data. So I don't think I trust that data. It seems kind of random. Besides, it was collected 6 or 7 or more days later, after it had already rained once or twice, heavy rains. And they talked about it was caked up and they had to chip it loose. Do you think they had any fine particles in that glob that they measured? Now we're going to look at a bunch of lathering up. I have 2 different series. The first one is by Ahmad Zafar. He had an apartment across the Hudson, took a bunch of pictures, and he got a lot of what was going on with Tower 2. Then another series with Tower 1. I'll mainly just go through these quickly, but let's notice a few things. Towers are cooking away here. Something interesting about this picture here. Both towers are standing. Why is southern Manhattan fuming? It's gotten hazy down here. And then you notice different things coming out of the building at different points. Like, what's this black stuff coming out? And there's also a place where, the mechanical floors of the North Tower, it had fuzzy blobs. You get come down the home stretch there. But there's a bunch of interesting events. Like here's, let's see, this one you can't see very well, but the mechanical floor of the North Tower has a big fuzzy blob that comes out of it. And I call this silly string. It looks like silly string squirting out of the mechanical floor of the South Tower. But you can tell when the building gets ready to go. It suddenly gets really furry looking with this black stuff. This is the South Tower. And then there it goes. Right after it goes, notice this series. And what I noticed in this was, as the cloud rolls out, not much happens, but then notice Tower 1 starts spitting out this stuff that I call lathering up. Looks like soap suds. Look at this picture here. So it's not from the clouds rolling out. It's from some other process that's meant to happen at the same time so people really don't realize what's going on. And here it is really oozing out of there, and then it gets shut off. And you have blue sky underneath that. And then he didn't have such a good series for Tower 1. But this picture is just beautiful. You have the core columns left standing, but see how it's streaked up? I wonder if that's 24-foot diameter, cylindrical beams. The plot thickens. And remember, this spire turned to dust. We've seen these before, so I'll zip through them quicker. And again, we know that that's probably not thermite. That's probably something else happening. Ace Baker put together the series for me of Amon Zafar pictures. Notice how the clouds roll out, and then this starts lathering up. You don't really notice it because you're busy looking at Tower 2's rollout of the cloud. But why is that coming out of appears to be coming out of every single window? And it comes out horizontally. You know it's not shooting up from the ground because this cloud at the top stays the same angle. It doesn't look like any pressure is lifting it up. But this top is the dark, and this is light. Maybe it's two different ingredients.
2, 1.
Seattle Kingdom. Notice how high the dust cloud went. Not much higher than the top of the kingdom. And then it just kind of diminished. Also, beforehand, we saw all of those firecrackers going off. All over the place. We didn't see anything like that. Here. This is the other set from this free host, whatever that site is, GJS I call it. This is a beautiful picture of Tower 1 lathering up. Just pouring out this lather. This other thing I call smoke rings. Looks like somebody blowing smoke rings. Intermittent black things coming out. Here we have the light ingredient. We have the dark ingredient. Wonder what that means. And you can see this series. Beautiful lathering up pictures. And then it quits lathering up. And then it starts blowing smoke rings. What is that black stuff that comes out? Fire doesn't do that. It doesn't, intermittently spurt out some squiggly things. Something else I started noticing, just before it goes, you see vertical, looks like fishing poles sticking up. And this is the series. We're looking at the last one's just before it goes, these three in here. This is the next to the last one. And you might be able to see some vertical black thingies in there. Notice there's no more fire here. Earlier, when there was a fire, it didn't have smoke coming out of there. And here's the last one. Can you see those? Looks like little fishing poles sticking up. It's hard with this resolution. It didn't seem to come out real well. And then we know how it rolls on down the street, rolls out. It stops right there, and then goes up. Look at that. Isn't that weird? It just stops. It's as though when the cloud maybe the dust is breaking down, it quits having its momentum because it's no longer big particles. It's now all turned to really fine particles that go up at just the same point in time. And here's that pedestrian walkway again. And how the dust stops right at that point. Now, there's something else that gets... This is one of those so-called squibs. Notice they look like lather squirting out.
The second tower just collapsing into a pile of rubble.
Here's the AP lead out of New York. Horrific sequence of destruction, terrorist crash.
After that, the second tower just collapsing into a pile
Those
of rubble.
aren't explosions.
After that, the second tower just collapsing into a pile of rubble.
I don't see a flash and a single explosion blasting out. I see like several windows of, it looks like this lather squirting out. And remember these in Building 7? They aren't explosive events. They don't look like the Kingdom did. We don't need to watch the Kingdom again. We didn't see bright flashes. And with Building 7, we had this 47-story building. Look at the street down below. Can you believe that it's going to drop straight down without spilling out across the street? That's more like twice the world's record. And nothing's come down that straight. Look at the left-hand alley there. It's just to have it come down into a nice, neat little pile, like Camelot. All leaves float in neat little piles at night. And the post office building didn't get any damage. It had debris on the roof, a little bit of dust. Here's looking down that street. Here's after Building 7 went poof. It didn't even reach across the street, the rubble pile. Something I started noticing, look at the dirt. Look at the water squirting out of the Verizon building onto the rubble pile of Building 7. There's no fuming coming up where the water's hitting it. If it was steam, if it was from heat, you'd see something. Nice dirt. And look at the pile, probably gets bigger with time. Again, looking at this lathering up and the smoke rings, that was Tower 1. This is Building 7 lathering up. When Building 7, we saw the video of it dropping. Didn't it look like it just got pushed off the edge of a cliff and just went down without any resistance whatsoever? I wonder if this lather tends to weaken the building so when a beam hits it, they can control what goes at what time. Let's think of a picture, a photograph. If you aren't familiar with photography, you say, how on earth, how much energy would it take to burn an image of somebody into that piece of paper? Unbelievable amount of energy, and that guy wouldn't be sitting still long enough to keep it in focus. But once you understand photographic emulsion, it just takes a teeny bit of light energy to cause the chemical reaction in the photographic film. Let's say we have the same event here, where the building is filled with some kind of gas, some kind of plasma, something, that the beam energizes when it hits it. So the beam does not have to be very powerful, but it controls where it goes when. And accidentally, maybe some of this lather got out in the middle of Liberty Street, and when the beam hit there, boom, you have a hole. Oops. And maybe the black part is like more hardener than resin. It's a different mixture. It's a catalyst for this stuff. Maybe there's some kind, like you have faster photographic film. Some's faster, some slower, because they couldn't lather up Tower 2 ahead of time. That would be too obvious. So they needed to have a stronger thing working. This one's pretty incriminating. We're told that Building 7 was damaged when Tower 1 fell on it. Tower 1's still standing. Why is Building 7 lathering up? Oops. This picture is taken from Reed Street. If you have a map, you can see that's just north of, I guess, Chambers. Now, this lathering, earlier in the day, we've seen this picture a lot. Look at this one. It's got more dark lather. If you want to make sure that thing is really well controlled, maybe you put more of the darker ingredient into it so it really just drops down to nothing. Well, that's pretty much, there's a few other things, but you've seen this lathering up, and I really think there's a whole lot to be had about that. What purpose does it serve? I've looked at some sites and seen like spray-on antenna material. So obviously you can have some things that are activated by other things. We know about photographic film. Perhaps there's a kind of a beam that triggers this material. What I wanted to show you is an interesting picture I've gotten from OSHA. From the OSHA site, they're taking out this big tank. Supposedly it carried Freon for cooling of the building. They have a lot of those tanks. But they had a really weird cover story for it. How many people here are familiar with how toxic Freon is? Is it very toxic?
You don't want to go breathe it in.
You don't want to breathe it nonstop, so it runs all the oxygen out of the room. But you can. It only displaces oxygen. That's the hazard to it. Is that, it runs the oxygen out of the air.
Do they flood computer rooms with that? Those gases they use?
Because it just makes the oxygen get pushed out. But you don't have to have special, authority to transport it. It's not like it's the most dangerous thing in the world. And you look at the safety data sheet, and it doesn't say that it's deadly. It's just that, if it runs all the oxygen out of the room, you don't have any oxygen to breathe. So why is OSHA saying we had to be very careful of removing these tanks and clear the whole site the day we were moving one of these tanks to make sure it didn't leak because it would instantly kill somebody? I'm wondering if that was the cover story for the fuzzy blobs that those policemen, the firefighters were breathing, keeled over. And it makes you kind of wonder, could they have put something in these tanks? Maybe some of the Freon tanks bleed them off over the weeks before that, and over the weekend when they did the power down, put something in those that they released. Remember we saw things spitting out of the mechanical floors. So it becomes kind of curious, and the air handling system could easily deliver that much stuff. That lathering up material, they had a good control on it. They could crank it up, crank it back almost instantly, and I believe you might wear out the air handling system to put that much pressure through it, but you could deliver the stuff really fast. This is the one after.
The EPA did find spotty levels of asbestos. A sample on a police car turned out dangerous. Another sample a couple of blocks away, not dangerous. But most interesting, in the mix, they think it's specks of steel that used to be beams and elevators, marble from the lobby floor and facings. So what were once the strongest architectural elements in the two towers were pulverized, large portions turned into clouds like this one. Still, there is this mystery. If some of the hardest materials were vaporized, how to account for the presence everywhere of paper? Fully intact letters, business forms, stationery. Paper is so fragile and combustible, and yet somehow, maybe because we have so much of it, it was everywhere.
Oh, good, this one didn't hang up. Notice the video on the left. You see paper coming out of this. It looks like it's an explosion. How can that be a regular chemical explosion, like with dynamite? You would have the paper being shredded. But it looks like the paper just gets churned around in the mix. And if you notice in the figure on the right, it's like it just suddenly turns into instant lather. This is another very interesting picture, watching a car ignite with spontaneous combustion. Oops. Remember the Coke truck that's parked down there around the corner? And this video here, the guy walks north. He walks up Church, and you see a flash right there at that point. And this corner is where a bunch of cars become ignited.
For example, is significant that it will help keep these visions, these images in people's minds for the days to come. That also leads to a lot of the anxiety. The things that we would see initially are people having difficulty concentrating, difficulty sleeping, feeling sadder than usual, Those are the kind of things that we see initially. Most people will get better from that, but we do know from what's happened before in Oklahoma City and other natural disasters outside and inside of this country that the sooner people are able to talk about it, and especially the trained mental hygiene workers, the better their prognosis is and the less severe the symptomatology will be.
Is it normal, doctor, for people to experience some unrealistic fears right now, whether it be about planes or tall buildings or something like that?
Okay, see it again. Andrew Johnson arranged several of these clips for me where we could see it over and over again. Again, walking up this way in the street, and then at the end, cars go on fire.
Is it normal, doctor, for people to experience some unrealistic fears right now, whether it be
spontaneous combustion?
About planes or tall buildings or something like that?
Absolutely. It's very easy for the events to kind of mushroom out of proportion. We have people here that came that we were trying to get in an elevator to go upstairs to one of our other counseling centers, and most people refuse to get in an elevator. That's an example of a kind of a cross-pollination.
Everything's on fire now.
Everything is going to become stressful to a lot of people in New York City for the next few days until there's some more stability and a sense that normalcy is returning.
Just in dealing with the people that I've come in contact with, I notice a lot of people whose moods are fluctuating.
They're not talking about what they're seeing. I don't think they realize what they're showing.
Normal, doctor, for people to...
And we see this one where the building just erupts into this emulsion. All right, this is speculation about these fuzzy blobs. Note where these are, and here's the guy holding his nose. Yeah, it must smell pretty bad. They act like this Freon is an invisible killer. And they cleared the area. It was a special event, removing it. And I'm wondering why they presented it that way. Again, this is that comment made on a forum that's so well said. We stand at the beginning of a new age. Our government has in its hands a method of disrupting the molecular basis for matter, and its first impulse was to weaponize it. Is this so hard to understand? Like splitting atoms to create destruction was hard to understand in 1945. This is the new and improved model, it appears. But these people should have been warned. Now, I see this guy in the front in the white shirt and wonder about his office mate or his spouse that was left behind. Why didn't they tell these people? I think that's the first time I've met Bob. I'm going to show you the pop quiz here. Real quick, let's see, this is some pictures we took last night. We drove up to, we did a road trip, a drive up to Minneapolis. Now that you've seen these various characteristics, see if you can identify anything. First of all, this is as close as we could get. This was on top of a hill, several blocks away, and here's the piece of bent bridge. That's all we could see. Layers upon layers of guards, of police tape. There it is. There it is in the background. That's as far as we could get. There's an area down below. We approached it just to see what would happen. We're looking from different areas, and one thing I noticed, I don't think it's rained here in the past couple of days, but the ground was sopping wet. Hosed down. There's the police tape. There's the bent thing. I leaned out over one of these police tapes, and I was going to, see how would they arrest me? What would they say in the paper? She leaned over 2 inches over the police tape to take this picture. Shame on her. What were they trying to hide? Then we walked down this other street, and they had this other guard booth with bright lights. And I asked this gal, down here, what are you trying to hide? And she does this with her earpieces. Oh, I don't have to answer that question. And I looked around, and it looks like the Secret Service kind of gizmo. She was being trained on the job, I suppose. It was 2nd and 12th is where they had that guard booth. And no pictures allowed. Does this seem like the normal thing for an accidental bridge collapse?
Just throw out one quick observation. I noticed that on CNN they aired the viewers actually submit the footage, and that viewer preferred to remain anonymous. That caught my eye. I went back later today.
There's some. Well, we collected some dirt samples, as close as we could get, but you see how far away we were, like a half mile? So, we know kind of where they were. And then there's this vehicle that looked like it was kind of dark in this picture, but it was loaded down with a bunch of officers. It was very heavily patrolled. And there was one woman that leaned out over, one step too far, and these police officers or guards immediately were getting her out of there. Quite a distance away. And we accidentally slipped in behind some other people and got into this parking garage and got these pictures. Oh, and the bridges, adjacent bridges, pedestrian bridges and so forth, where you could look, they were closed and nobody could get close enough to see. That seemed kind of strange. From newspapers on Wednesday evening.
Has anybody looked at it on Google Earth?
No.
Yes. Did you see?
Google Earth doesn't show the bridge because Google Earth is about 3-year-old pictures. Change them over as much as possible. When you try and do it tilt on Google Earth, all you do is see the bridge laying in the lake bed because of the fact that when you try and tilt a flat picture, that's what you get. So it doesn't show the side of the bridge, and of course it's a 3-year-old picture. But
You notice this pickup truck here, aimed down? If you can see the side wall of his flatbed, he's got a little fire going. Why is the steel part of his flatbed burning? This vehicle has a kind of peeling lip to it, and it's got a hole in the roof. You get some other interesting things going on. This is a further back shot. And close-up of this is here, and you have this ray car has a hole in its roof. Why? There's some interesting things to point out. I forgot I had these circles. And I don't know what's here. What? Oh, I don't know what's, why these pictures don't agree. One's supposed to be close up from the other, but something moved. And that is the one that's close up over here with a hole in the roof. So there's some interesting points. And I wonder if this was jet fuel, if they're using jet fuel in trucks these days. But the thing that jumps out at me is all of the fuming, tremendous fuming. If it's smoke, it's in one place or another. Why don't we have any bent steel? The end of that looks kind of odd. Just questions. I don't know the answers. This does not, though, look like a normal accident investigation when you're kept a half a mile or so from where whatever happened. And these are the pictures of the bridge beforehand. I don't know, it was last year, I think, they were taken. But what would cause every section to fail at the exact same moment? Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the endurance.